So we're here with Lou Borrelli. Not sure what his title is. I think it's Chief Drumming Officer at the NCTC, the National Content and Technology Cooperative. Lou, maybe you could give us a sense of what exactly you guys do, how you look at the industry, and then we can talk maybe a bit about how things are changing and how they've been changing for many years.
Sure. So the co-op has been around for 40 years. It was originally a buying co-op primarily focused on programming. And over the years, we have branched out into hardware and software, IP transit and transport. We have a new mobile business. We're launching a broadband TV over-the-top business. And we're in the midst of an assessment of AI for our membership.
Well, let's talk about AI a little bit, because that's a fun one. One that I've been studying a lot on a lot of different angles, and it has an effect on Hollywood with video generation and that sort of thing, and then it also has an effect on network management with AI being used to manage these networks and be more reliable and efficient. It has to do with CSRs and customer service and using bots instead of people in some cases, or to maybe lead to a real person if they can't solve your problem, that sort of thing. So a lot of exciting things happening. You mentioned the diversity of the membership in terms of very, very small operators and then some mid-sized, pretty big ones in the mid-side range. How do they have to look at AI differently depending on the size of their companies, what regions they're in, how much rural they are versus ex-urban and that sort of thing? I mean, what kind of factors affect?
Well, I think the main thing that we're trying to establish is that there are use cases and business cases that apply specifically to our industry that we can vet and organize so that our members can choose to participate without a heavy lift, without a significant investment, because again, we're using the collective power of the co-op to provide this level of service and integration at a reasonable or as low a cost as you can. If you're not in the game, you're going to be left behind. And it's not because you're not a competent, qualified company. It's because everybody else is going to be moving so much faster at a much lower cost going forward that being competitive is going to be a challenge. So I think what we are here for is that strategic layer that our smaller members can't afford to have. So we develop these opportunities, we assess the technology, we create the partnerships, and then it's up to the members to decide whether this is something that works for them.
Well, I mean, we talked about, though, all the different ways that AI is going to change everything, and we listed them earlier, especially when competing. I mean, I'd say for all of your members, competing against very, very large companies that are not NCTC members, that are multi-billion-dollar companies. Who do you think AI is going to benefit more? I mean, do you see benefits for both sides in different ways, or is AI going to benefit the larger corporations more than?
I think if you're good at your job, you're going to be able to do it much better, much faster. If you suck at your job, there's going to be nowhere to hide, because it'll be more obvious than ever that you suck and you're going to suck faster. So who it benefits, it's almost immaterial, because if you're both, if each company is trying to maximize the opportunity that they have, when you're an independent operator in a market that you've been in for 125 or 150 years in some cases, those customers would much rather buy from a local company. We've seen that in our research all along, whether it's internet, whether it's mobile, whether it's whatever. And so I would say that if you adopt an AI approach, it means you won't fall behind, or at least you won't be behind the big companies, the big spenders, as much as you would have if you hadn't. I don't think that it's an option. I think you have to choose how you best do it for you.
But it would seem to me that the smaller companies are more nimble, so it's possible that in some cases AI would help them even more than a larger bureaucratic corporation.
Yeah, I suppose. I think that's probably
Or
a
maybe
fair
just some
statement.
elements of
But I
AI.
do think, I think the question is are you trying to boil the ocean or you're trying to solve a few problems?
Yeah.
I think that's really it because AI can do a lot of things, but you also have to teach it or you have to provide the level of investment in order for it to be effective for you. And you know, there are stories of companies spending tens of millions, hundreds of millions to get this going. You know, we're going the approach that there are a lot of vendors and opportunists that can help our industry, and it doesn't force you to have to stand up a whole bunch of data centers and a nuclear reactor to power them, right?
Yeah, these little mini nuclear reactors, we could have a whole podcast on those.
Mm-hmm.
Really interesting
Yeah.
development there. I think there's 10 or 12 different companies trying to do that. So an interesting future that we're heading into, and we could spend so much time on it, but I did want to make sure that we hit what you're doing with the MVNO because it's such an important, wireless is so important now to be part of the bundle, any telecommunications bundle that anyone's offering, big, large, small, mid-size. I assume that's why you got into it, why you did the deal with AT&T. I know there are a lot of things that people have to consider before deciding to do an MVNO, a lot of advantages, but there's some costs and things like that too, so it's not maybe for everybody. But what are you finding? What are the members telling you about it?
Well, I think the way that we've set up the program, there is minimal investment unless you really want to create some custom type of an approach which requires a lot of development. We basically took all of the, or well, I shouldn't say all, as many of the asks that our larger members made when they started doing their own kind of development path. We looked at that and said that's not sustainable for the broader membership, so we've developed a common platform that everyone can use. It has most of the bells and whistles that others have been paying for. It's included. And functionally, it will operate the same way. There's certain trade-offs that aren't, I don't think, are significant. You know, the amount of customization you can do isn't unlimited, so you have to be wary of that. But the opportunity is you can provide a world-class service at or below a market rate and still make real margin. It's the way we've constructed it, and it's working fine. The challenge for a lot of our members is they've never been in this business before, and so it's something new, and they've got to kind of go through their own thought process, and we have to help them through that. There are other members that were in wireless and got out because in the traditional wireless, it didn't work for them. And so now convincing them that this is not that takes some time. But I agree with you. I think if you think about the consumer, and we can debate whether this is applicable, whether you're a video customer or a broadband customer or whatever, but the idea of the continuity of connectivity, this is sort of how I position it, is real. I think that having an experience, whether it's a video experience in the home on a traditional video platform or if it's an OTT video experience, and having that connectivity in the home then transfer to a mobile device that is with you, I think is pretty compelling. And what we've seen is that consumers are perfectly fine buying mobile from their internet provider. And we have to thank Comcast and we have to thank Charter because they plowed the road, you know? And so it's not an unthinkable thing. It's actually quite common. And I think what we heard this morning is, you know, 70% of the new ads over the last 2 years come from cable companies, MVNOs and cable companies.
Do you think wireless is going to evolve into something, especially for the smaller and mid-sized companies, that is more important as a companion for broadband than for a total bundle, including video? Because as you mentioned, some of your members are probably looking to get out of video at some point, or to just subcontract out to, you know, YouTube TV or something like that.
I think that the broadband plus mobile bundle is, I think it's essential. I mean, if I owned a company today, I'd be doing it. And that's why we're being very bullish and proactive with our members. The whole video situation we have is obviously, it's pretty complex. We've had members that have gotten out of video altogether. And our broadband offering is what they are, that we're offering so that they can, in fact, stay in video, but with broadband TV. I think that those that are staying in are happy to continue to support a linear platform for as long as it makes sense. And they're also willing to put in a broadband TV option for those members that only have broadband. I think that, what we're in the business of is creating choices and opportunities. And so this is an important component of that. The broadband TV offering we have, which is rolling out now, is round numbers, roughly 40 channels. And the way it's constructed.
You're working with TiVo on that?
Well, we're working with TiVo and every other platform.
Okay.
But we have a big TiVo presence within the co-op. So they're first just because of the number of members we have on TiVo. But the real opportunity, I think, is to establish that first package. Now it's general entertainment, there's no sports. But so it's value priced. I think that, what we've told members is we wouldn't charge more than $20 for it. I have some members that are probably going to include it as part of a bigger broadband bundle and sort of absorb the cost. But I think that it opens the door for us to do more. I'm not a big proponent of adding to that bundle and raising the price. I'm a proponent of adding what I call snackable bites for like $3, $4, or $5. So you add a handful of channels, you can add it to this platform, or you can just buy it by itself. I think that OTT gives us the opportunity to do what consumers have been telling us for a long time. I only want to pay for what I watch. I want to choose what I pay for. I want that convenience to take it with me. Real a la carte has yet to, emerge.
Feel like it's a la carte.
You want to give them that feeling, yeah. But as long as we're still collecting lots of money for the networks for retrans, and as long as we're being burdened with, ever-growing sports rights, it's really hard for me to feel good about rebuilding what was the old cable bundle.
Well, that's what I wonder a little bit is, with the exception of sports and news and that kind of live programming that you do have to watch in a linear fashion, I just wonder whether the younger generations, for example, that will be getting older over the next 10, 15 years, whether they're ever going to go to a habit where they watch linear TV or if everything has to be on demand. Although at the same time, you look at fast channels and the success that some of those have had, and that's basically a linear experience. So,
look, I'm sorry. Can somebody explain to me why we call fast channels instead of broadcast television? I mean,
Alan Wolk coined it, and everybody started
I understand, but I do think what it boils down to is, can you deliver consumers an experience at a price that they view as attractive, and do they feel like they have more control over the outcome? If look, I've been at this since 1978. There was one satellite. It was one channel on satellite. It was HBO. There was probably less than 15 million cable customers in the U.S., and there was probably 4,000 cable companies. The idea that now that we have the technology to literally do whatever a consumer wants us to do, and the fact that we can't because of regulatory restrictions and business rules that don't permit it, that is kind of the conflict, right? There are billions of dollars on each side of the table. Nobody wants to take Humpty Dumpty apart and put them back together. So we have to have these opportunities in bite-sized pieces that we can, provide at least some diversity, some clarity, some opportunity for members to pick and choose, right? And that's where we're at. And if anybody tells you they know what to do, they're lying. I mean, this is the part of the show where we make it up as we're going along, and we are smart enough to be agile and nimble and make adjustments as necessary.
I mean, are we learning any consistent things from consumers at this point, or is it just all over the map in terms of what they want? I mean, obviously they want more choice. They want packages that are more flexible, that give them ways to pick and choose things, whether you're talking about video or broadband or wireless and how they're packaged together, it can be everything, right? But at the same time, it seems like no two consumers these days. It just seems like consumers are so individually different. I mean, you almost, it's hard to even like block them off into specific demos anymore.
Well, I think, I'm not so sure that our old definition of demos apply to the new reality of demos. And I think that you talked earlier about generational differences. I mean, I can remember being so excited about launching all the channels we launched on cable, primarily the kids' channels. I remember this, in fact, I was quoted probably in Multi-Channel News saying this, that when the kids who grew up in Nickelodeon grow up and have kids, they're all going to buy cable, right? Because that's what they grew up on. Well,
then YouTube came along.
Exactly, and other things came along, and so you never really know, right? Where the next speed bump is or the next pothole, and I think what you have to have is you have to have a solid network that provides good, consistent quality, the bandwidth that people need, and then you've got to be able to tack on the things that provide incremental value and service. And I think that's sort of the move from what we'll call a linear platform to an over-the-top experience. I think that's what we're trying to capture, to be honest.
Well, let me sort of as a final question, or wrap a couple questions into one. First of all, where do you see the future of NCTC in terms of, I mean, when you look 5-10 years down the road, how will the way that you collaborate with members and the sorts of services you provide change based on everything that's changing in the marketplace that we've talked about during this entire thing? And then also just, what are some of the things that not just your members, but all people in this industry, and whether you call it cable or telecommunications or whatever this is now, that they should be watching out for, kind of being alert about, in terms of their business planning going forward. It's a lot of stuff in one.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. Look, and I'm saying this not trying to be political, but I do think there are a number of companies, especially in the smaller markets, and some of them are relatively new, some were created just for this opportunity, that were counting on BEAD, counting on $42+ billion.
Now they're going to be competing with Elon for money.
Well, and that's why I said I didn't want to make it political, but I think the most disruptive part of what we're looking at near term is whether BEAD actually happens or not. And if it doesn't happen at all, I think there's some issues. I think even if it happens in a modified state, there could be issues. Because
and it's on hold. We should say it's on hold right now.
It is on hold.
At the time of the taping of this, it was on hold.
It was on hold
through executive order.
Exactly. So I'd say this: there are pressures outside of the industry that affect us either indirectly or directly. I think BEAD is one. I think any further regulatory challenges, burdens, however you want to press it, could also be a problem. But I think from the consumer side, they don't care about that. I mean, they really don't. And so, and I would say this, the consumer really hasn't changed. The consumer always wanted choice. They always wanted to pay less. They always wanted more convenience and control. We never had the technology to deliver that. Once we did, we jumped so far ahead that consumers couldn't make up their minds because now you had all these choices. And I think that, giving somebody an unlimited opportunity, in some cases, paralyze them. Like they don't know what to pick.
That's why
They don't know
people
what
can't pick toothpaste, right?
exactly. So from where I sit, I think that it's how do you adapt to those outside pressures will probably be most important. Also, there has been the start of something familiar to both of us, which is a roll-up or a consolidation of companies. Being candid, I think that one of the bigger threats to the NCTC is that members get rolled up in a way that upsets the balance potentially, and there's not a lot we can do about it. We can only react to it.
And we should note, again, political stuff, but we should note we're heading into probably a more deregulatory environment with M&A potentially, and that coincides with, I think we were talking about this yesterday, that coincides with these private equity folks who want to get their money out at some point, and there's been a lot of private equity fiber investment that needs to get a return, right?
But there's a difference. So when we built up Marcus Cable, our financial partner was Goldman Sachs. So we had access to unlimited funds, and they were very supportive of everything we were doing. That was a principal investment fund that we got. And so it had a high hurdle rate because we were competing against other options. And they were very, knock on wood, we had a great run. We sold the company for a lot of money. They got a lot of money. We made some money too. Today, a lot of the PE money is infrastructure funds. They're very different. Infrastructure funds look more like utility investing. So they're not looking for the 5x, 10x, whatever, right? It's a different mindset. But yet, to your point, at some point they want to harvest. I would argue that the infrastructure funds aren't as short of a fuse as the old school PE guys. If you're an old school PE investment fund, 3 to 5 years, you're out. We were fortunate. Goldman stayed with us for 8. These infrastructure funds are kind of almost like annuities. I mean, I shouldn't characterize it cavalierly like that, but there's a longer runway. And if there's BEAD uncertainty, if there's regulatory uncertainty, I would say that they won't rush to the exits if it's an infrastructure fund. They might look at the opportunity, if they're a different fund, for acquisition in order to help them get to the harvest. And
is it possible they'd be more apt to acquire smaller companies because BEAD they may have less opportunity, BEAD might go away, or more might go to satellite?
Well, you'd have to ask the companies, because I do think that if you were looking for BEAD and you're not going to get it, there aren't many other places you can go. Now, if you needed BEAD to be successful, then there's a slim chance that an investment firm would buy or invest in you, because the economics of BEAD were simple. We can't afford to build this area out, so the government is going to support it, and we have to put in an amount. Now, as you know, there are 50 different sets of rules because they gave it to the states. And you've also heard that there are a number of states where the equity requirements meant that companies that wanted to build won't. We're not going to do any business there because they want us to put in half the money when we could literally, on the edge of afford to do 20% of the money. So those areas weren't getting built. It's a mess. And I think that anybody who's looking at this is saying there's more uncertainty than certainty. That never, I think, makes for a good investment, environment. And so it's a more wait and see, honestly. I mean, look, I don't have a crystal ball. I've been doing it a long time, and I've seen a lot. We've never seen anything like this. So you got to kind of take a breath, weather the storm, sort out when the facts are known, and then work from there.
Never seen anything like this. It's that different what's happening now.
Because of the uncertainty in Washington. Yeah. And that that affects everything downstream.